I'm in the midst of a heated dispute with Jeff, my soon-to-be ex-husband. Jeff had been unfaithful a few months ago, and now, after I lost both of my parents, he's trying to reconcile. To complicate matters, I've recently discovered that I'm set to inherit $7 million. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and this situation has left me feeling overwhelmed and betrayed. Jeff and I had been married for 2 years, and before that, we had spent almost 3 years together. From the beginning, we had dreams of starting a family. Just 8 months into our marriage, we decided it was the right time to try for a baby. We had already been living together for 4 years, and the desire to become parents was strong. It felt like the natural next step in our relationship. However, despite our best efforts and months of trying, I struggled to conceive. After numerous attempts without success, we decided to undergo fertility testing. The results were devastating. Both Jeff and I were diagnosed with fertility issues. This news was a significant blow to me, as I had been yearning for a child of my own. Emotionally shattered by the diagnosis, I found myself withdrawing and shutting down. I desperately wanted to hold on to the hope of starting a family, but Jeff, instead of providing the support I needed, began to distance himself. Our conversations became sparse, and over the next few months, our communication dwindled to almost nothing. This growing distance pushed me into an even darker place emotionally, making me feel more alone and despondent. In my lowest moments, I considered reaching out to Jeff to try and salvage our marriage. I believed that we could overcome our challenges together, supporting each other through the tough times. However, before I could make that effort, Jeff confessed that he had been involved in an extramarital affair with an old friend. This affair had been ongoing for several weeks. Jeff explained that he had reconnected with this friend shortly after we received our fertility test results. She was visiting town for a conference, and their lunch meetings eventually led to his betrayal. He admitted that he wanted to be honest with me but felt too distant and sad to express his feelings properly. Instead of addressing the issue head-on, he chose to remain silent until the affair came to light. When Jeff revealed the truth about his infidelity, I was overwhelmed with emotions. I wanted to scream at him, to confront him about his actions, but I couldn't muster the strength to do so. Instead, I collapsed onto the couch and cried uncontrollably, feeling utterly helpless and heartbroken. Jeff didn't offer any comfort or reassurance. He remained motionless, offering no solace as I wept for nearly an hour. Eventually, I managed to calm down slightly, and Jeff informed me that he needed to spend the night at his parents' house to take a break from everything that had happened. I pleaded with him to stay, despite his betrayal, but he had already packed his bags and left without further discussion. After Jeff left, I found myself crying again, unable to move from where I was until midnight. That day was the darkest day of my life. I was so consumed by depression that I ignored all calls and messages, isolating myself completely. Friends and family tried to reach out, but I refused to open the door or let anyone in. When they realized I wasn't responding, a few of them came by to check on me. However, seeing that I wouldn't let them in, they left after understanding that I needed space. Despite my initial resistance, I did make my presence known by shouting for them to leave, ensuring they knew I was still alive before retreating into myself once more. I'm immensely grateful to those who reached out because, honestly, I don't think I could have coped without their support. For the next 2 weeks, I barely ate, watched TV sporadically, and slept most of the time, feeling like a zombie. Then, one day, a cousin came to visit. I told him to leave, but he insisted that he had important news to share in person. I dismissed him, arguing until he became frustrated and finally revealed that my father had passed away from a heart attack. Due to my prolonged depression, I hadn't checked my phone, and no one had managed to inform me until his visit. The news of my father's death was another crushing blow, compounding my grief from Jeff's betrayal. After my cousin left, I broke down again, crying so loudly that our neighbors came to check on me. That evening, I booked a flight back home for the funeral, feeling completely lost and relying on the help of acquaintances to navigate the trip. Somehow, I made it home safely and attended the funeral, though I was too numb to cry much. I had planned to stay for 2 weeks to support my mother, who was devastated by the loss of my father. My dad was a respected attorney, beloved in our community, and his passing was mourned by many, even those who traveled from abroad to pay their respects. My mother and I were overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support, but we barely interacted due to the sheer number of guests and relatives present. Just 3 days after my father's funeral, tragedy struck again. My mother passed away. The medical report stated that she died of natural causes, peacefully in her sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her heart had been broken by the series of devastating events. Within days of my father's funeral, we had to arrange another, more intimate service for my mother. Her death hit me even harder because it occurred while I was sleeping, leaving me feeling like a robot, emotionally shut down. After my mother's funeral, I returned home to handle some legal matters related to my parents' will. With the probate process completed, there was nothing more for me to do there, so I went back to my own home and resumed my old, unhealthy routine, eating little, watching TV, and sleeping most of the day. My life spiraled out of control from that point on. The depression was so severe that I couldn't bring myself to eat properly or get restful sleep. I ended up losing my job after just a week of not showing up, having failed to inform anyone about my absence. It was a significant blow, but considering how I had been isolating myself, it was somewhat expected. Over the next 4 months following my parents' deaths, I remained unemployed and confined to my home, not engaging with the outside world. I didn't speak to anyone and only managed to keep up with the bare essentials, paying rent and bills on time. It wasn't until recently that I realized how much I had neglected every other aspect of my life. For about a month and a half, I continued in this state until one day, I decided I needed to do something about my deteriorating appearance. My hair was a tangled mess, my clothes were dirty, and my face looked like something out of a horror movie. Determined to make a change, I attempted to brush my hair, but the brush snapped due to the knots. This minor incident served as a wake-up call, prompting me to confront the reality of my situation. I had a breakthrough moment in front of the mirror. Instead of crying, I allowed myself to release all the pent-up emotions, preparing myself to rebuild my life. That day, I treated myself to a full hair makeover, a spa treatment, and a massage at one of the best salons in town. Fortunately, I still had a substantial amount of savings from when I and Jeff were trying to conceive. I had previously held a well-paying job, so financial issues weren't a concern, especially after Jeff left and I stopped accumulating massive bills. With this newfound self-care, I felt a bit better and decided to go on a shopping spree, buying a few new dresses. Upon returning home, I realized my living space was a disaster, so I hired a cleaning service to restore some order. I wasn't embarrassed by the state of my home. I understood the chaos I had been through and recognized that anyone else in my situation would likely have retreated similarly. With my home clean and my appearance improved, I began searching for therapists to help me address my clinical depression. The shopping spree had provided temporary relief, but I knew I needed professional help to truly overcome my struggles. Additionally, I started looking for new job opportunities and reached out to my previous employers to explain my absence, hoping for recommendation letters. To my surprise, my former boss invited me back to work. She mentioned that her son was an advocate for mental health awareness and believed that I deserved a chance to get my life back on track. She also offered to connect me with her son, who worked with several excellent mental health professionals, making my search for a therapist easier. Grateful for her support, I accepted her offer, regained my job, and began attending therapy sessions regularly. After nearly a month of weekly sessions, I started to feel like I was making progress. However, there was one crucial task I hadn't addressed yet: filing for divorce. Caught up in my depression, I had forgotten to initiate the process, still clinging to the hope that Jeff would return. 4 days ago, I finally took action and filed for divorce. Shortly after, Jeff called me. Normally, I wouldn't answer calls from anyone, but given our history, I felt a flicker of excitement, mistakenly believing he was reaching out to reconcile. We hadn't spoken in almost 4 months, and during that time, I had been steadily improving my situation. I hoped his call signaled the start of a fresh chapter for both of us. Jeff hinted at reconciliation by inviting me to dinner at a restaurant we both loved. I eagerly agreed, dressed up, and went to meet him that evening. When I saw him, I was thrilled. He seemed genuinely happy to see me. However, he didn't inquire about my well-being or offer any apologies. Instead, he dominated the conversation with stories about his recent travels and the wonderful places he had visited. He casually mentioned that his old friend, with whom he had the affair, had encouraged him to take time away for soul-searching. Speaking in the past tense, he made it seem like the affair was over. When I asked if they were still together, he laughed and said no, explaining that she was too busy to commit to a relationship and he wasn't ready either. I felt a sense of relief, not realizing that just because they weren't officially together didn't mean there were no lingering feelings. I was so happy to see Jeff that I didn't fully absorb the implications of his words, convincing myself that he was back for me and that we could rekindle our relationship happily ever after. However, as the evening progressed, I became increasingly shocked when Jeff didn't ask about me or acknowledge the pain he had caused. Despite my hope for reconciliation, our conversation remained superficial until dessert, when I decided to address our relationship directly. I asked him how he had coped with our separation. Jeff responded that the separation had likely been easier for him than for me. He then touched my hand and mentioned that he was aware I had lost both my parents within days of each other. I was stunned because I hadn't realized he knew about their deaths, which explained why he hadn't reached out sooner to offer support. This revelation set off alarm bells in my mind. Despite knowing about my parents' passing, Jeff hadn't made any effort to check on me or ensure I was okay. His indifference was the first major red flag. Continuing the conversation, Jeff expressed sadness over my parents' deaths, saying he had liked them but had been too busy traveling to contact me. He mentioned that he planned to reach out once he was back. I smiled, processing the information, and he then introduced a topic he had been contemplating for a while, our divorce. Contrary to my expectations of a reconciliation, he asked if I had thought about what I wanted to retain from the divorce. Confused, I asked him to clarify, and he explained that since it had been some time since our separation, he believed it was finally time to officially file for divorce so we could both move on with our lives. Realizing that the dinner was not a romantic reunion but rather a final farewell, I felt foolish for misinterpreting his intentions. I was embarrassed and angry that he had treated me like a friend despite his betrayal, boasting about his life while neglecting to show any concern for my well-being. Jeff then brought up the topic of my inheritance, mentioning that he had been thinking about it and wanted to discuss what I would keep from our assets. This was infuriating because I knew I was set to inherit nearly $7 million from my parents. I calmly corrected him, informing him that the inheritance was solely mine and that he would only receive a divorce settlement. I had already consulted with my parents' attorney and instructed him to sell any property left to me, ensuring I would receive my share of the inheritance promptly after the probate process. Jeff's demeanor shifted as I detailed my financial situation, and I made sure to emphasize that our inheritance was not considered a joint asset, preventing him from claiming any part of it. Additionally, since he had admitted to infidelity, he had no grounds to request alimony. I expressed that his departure was the best thing that had happened to me, allowing me to rebuild my life without him. Feeling triumphant, I left the restaurant, leaving Jeff to process my revelations. My in-laws were furious with me for flaunting my inheritance after Jeff had left me during my most vulnerable time. They accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, but I hung up on them without responding, unwilling to engage in their criticism. Jeff's friends and family began to harass me relentlessly, both online and in person, criticizing me for my actions. They accused me of intentionally causing Jeff mental distress to exact revenge for his infidelity and blamed me for his actions by claiming that my emotional withdrawal forced him to seek comfort elsewhere. Despite Jeff also facing fertility issues, they painted me as the villain who abandoned him emotionally without effort to find someone else. I felt overwhelmed by their hate campaign, especially since it had started to affect my reputation at work. 3 weeks after filing for divorce, Jeff's family and friends escalated their harassment, launching a full-blown hate campaign against me on social media. They accused me of deliberately causing Jeff's suffering and blamed me for his infidelity, claiming that my emotional withdrawal left him no choice but to cheat. They ignored the fact that Jeff also had fertility issues and that I never actively sought out someone else to replace him. Determined to protect my reputation, I decided to take legal action. I warned Jeff's family and friends to cease their harassment, as their actions were affecting not only me but also my coworkers who had become aware of the situation. In response to the mounting pressure, I proceeded with the divorce, determined not to let Jeff off easily. I planned to sue his parents and friends for their defamatory actions after making it clear that their harassment needed to stop. Just 4 days ago, Jeff began contesting the divorce. He claimed to have had a change of heart and now believed that we were meant to be together. I suspected that his motives were not purely based on love but were influenced by the impending inheritance. During a phone call, Jeff insisted that he still loved me and wanted to make our marriage work, dismissing my frustrations and anger as part of a game I was playing to get back at him for his cheating. He reassured me that everything would be fine before abruptly ending the call. I was left in disbelief, struggling to process Jeff's sudden shift in attitude. Anger and frustration overwhelmed me, and I felt an intense urge to lash out physically, though I knew it wouldn't solve anything. Jeff continued to present himself as a jerk, disregarding the pain he had caused me and attempting to mend our relationship for his own reasons. I realized that reconciling with him would only drag me back into a toxic and unfulfilling relationship. Determined to move forward, I rejected his attempts to reconcile, recognizing that he was more interested in the inheritance than in genuinely rebuilding our relationship. Nearly 2 months after filing for divorce, the case proceeded to mediation. The process was exhausting, as Jeff remained insistent that we should stay together despite my clear desire to end the marriage. I found it difficult to see the point in negotiating when my stance was non-negotiable. I did not want to be with him. Despite the exhaustion, I participated in mediation, hoping that it might help us reach an agreement. However, I knew deep down that we were unlikely to find common ground, and the situation was only going to escalate to court proceedings. As anticipated, the case eventually went to court. True to my expectations, the divorce was finalized, and I gained full control over my inheritance. Jeff was visibly upset by the outcome, but I remained steadfast, knowing that I had made the right decision for my well-being. The probate process was complete, and I was set to recover the money I had spent on legal fees, plus additional funds from the inheritance. With the legal battles behind me, I began to rebuild my life, feeling a sense of relief and empowerment. Life has started to improve significantly. I no longer feel the weight of depression pulling me down, and I'm able to enjoy the financial stability that comes with my inheritance. I've moved forward, leaving behind the turmoil of my past relationship and the grief of losing my parents. The support from friends, family, and professionals played a crucial role in my recovery, and I'm grateful for their presence during such a difficult time. As I look ahead, I'm optimistic about the future, knowing that I've overcome immense challenges and am now in a much better place emotionally and financially. Thank you to everyone who supported me through this journey. I couldn't have done it without you.